So that's our presentation today. The topic is Polish citizenship in the Commonwealth. First of all, a quick word about us. The organizer of this webinar is Your Roots in Poland. We are both genealogical and citizenship firm. We are also a non-profit society that promotes genealogy, and starting from just a few months ago, also Polish citizenship cases. So if you have Polish ancestry, and even if you do not qualify for the Polish citizenship, we encourage you to write to us or contact us. Perhaps we'll be able to help you discover your roots. In general, not all searches are done for the legal purposes. Sometimes there are also sentimental ones. And with Christmas approaching, that might be a good idea for a gift too, to beloved ones, to discover something about your family. So once again, we encourage you to contact us. The contact details will be provided at the end of the presentation, as well as the question and answer session. So please hold your questions until then. We'll try our best to answer as many questions as possible. And the ones that we won't be able to answer within our short span of this webinar, we'll make sure to answer them by email or contact you in other methods. So starting with the presentation, I just wanted to say that discussion of the legal and formal framework of the Polish citizenship confirmation procedure was the topic of our previous webinar. So if you are most interested in how to apply to the government and topics surrounding that, we encourage you to check our YouTube channel, where there is a recording of this previous webinar, and you can check it how we discussed each stage of the process. Here we will deal mostly with discussing the background that was for thousands of Polish ancestors. The Polish route from the USSR through Iran and Africa to the UK, and also other routes from being drafted to Wehrmacht forcibly through Germany and displaced person camps also to the UK. So two routes, as in two occupation zones of Poland, the one being German and the other being Soviet. So let's get right to it with the background, historical background. So here you can see the map of Second Polish Republic and also how it was divided. So the west part was occupied by Germany, and the eastern part was occupied by Soviets. And then when the war erupted between Nazis and Soviets, also the borders changed. But for our purposes, it's just essential to know about these occupation zones. So, like I said, thousands of Poles were displaced by the policies of the occupants, and many of them chose not to return to Poland after the war ended. We'll also discuss why and where they did go, but for most of you, I think you would be able to tell on your own from your family's history when they discuss it with you or your parents. So first of all, with the German route. So as you can see with the numbers, there are a lot of people being displaced from Polish territories. First of all, they were forced laborers in the German Reich. They were taken to farms and to factories to work instead of Germans that were drafted to fight the war. So they were just forced labor, and they were taken to Germany by the Poles call it łapanka, so just being taken without any announcement or anything like that. And also a lot of them were displaced to make place for German colonists. So there were plans for the westernmost part of Poland to become just German territory directly ruled from Berlin and only populated by Germans. So Poles were to be displaced further east or south, some even to Romania. And the plans started generally, they were in motion at the start of the Second World War, but early 1940, that is the year that they generally started with enforcement of those plans. And another big wave was after the failed Warsaw Uprising of 1944, when our capital city was basically leveled to the ground and people couldn't live there anymore. So almost all inhabitants of Warsaw were displaced either to Germany or other occupied zones. And there is also a point about Volksdeutsche, so people that were either forcibly or sometimes voluntarily described as ethnic Germans, but being Polonized or being Kashubians, Silesians. So they had some connection to Germany or German culture, and they were described by the occupant as being really people of higher standing, higher category, but they were also forced to serve in the army based on that. So as you would be able to see, a lot of those people that were forced to sign the Volksliste and become Volksdeutsche later on just deserted the German army, or when captured, switched sides because they didn't really want to fight for Germany. And as to deportations in the Soviet Union, it was more direct, I would say, because Soviets were making plans for after the war also. So 700,000 people, between 700,000 and 1 million, were deported to the USSR. 100,000 were drafted forcibly into the Soviet army. So it is worth mentioning that being forced either to Soviet or German army, if we can prove that it was forced, and most of the cases we can, then it does not count as service in the foreign non-Polish army, something that would generally disqualify from Polish citizenship up well to 1950s. But being forced into the army does not count really, because it was not a choice of the Polish ancestor. As a result of those moving of Polish people, almost 58,000 died by inhumane treatment. So either by cold or lack of food, or just being beaten or killed. And up till Sikorski-Majski Agreement, Poles didn't really have any rights. Stalin granted all inhabitants of Eastern Poland Soviet citizenship, but ethnic Poles were treated badly, as you can assume. And after Soviets joined the Allied forces in the result of German attack on them, the British encouraged Polish authorities, Polish government in exile, to sign the agreement with the USSR. So and that is when Polish and Soviet governments reluctantly but started cooperating. And as a result, they were forced that they were formed Polish army called Anders Army, and over 100,000 were saved by it. The Berlin Army was a similar formation, but formed later on, and in more direct rule of Communist Party. They also reached Poland after all, but as I mentioned, they fought later on. So moving on, that's the background, and we will now move to the timeline of Polish corps under British command. So this is the route most generally from Soviet occupation zone, and this probably could explain your family history as well, how your Polish ancestor ended up in one of the Commonwealth countries. I hope so. So let's get right to it. The first date, in August of 1941, General Anders assumes command of Polish corps in the USSR. So the name of the corps is first Polish forces in the east, but then it becomes Polish forces in the west. It is about the same formation. So it's formed near Buzuluk. It's on Russian Kazakhstan zone. 3 waves of Polish soldiers and civilians that traveled with the army left Soviets to Iran. And due to deteriorating relations between Polish and Soviet governments, because as it is described below, they were cutting down the food rations, so there was significant hunger within Polish camps, and as a result of those bad living conditions and hunger, there were also diseases. But Churchill managed to get Stalin to agree that Poles were free to leave, and so they did. They left for Iran. As you can see, not only soldiers, but also a lot of civilians, and half of those civilians were children, most often orphaned children or having just one parent because of the losses that most Polish families had when they were displaced from mostly easternmost part of Poland to Siberia or Archangel. So this is the north of Russia. Very bad conditions to live in, and also they didn't really have any support from Soviet government because they were just treated as lower category of humans. So that's that. Yeah, so late 1942, the Iran was not perfect place for permanent Polish presence because of the German offensive in the Caucasus, and also Iran was shared between in shared custody between UK and USSR, so Soviets still had something to say. Civilians were transported mostly to Africa, but you can see the list of countries here. Also Palestine, so mostly Palestine in Africa, Lebanon, Palestine, India, Uganda, Kenya, Tanganyika, Rhodesia, South Africa, New Zealand, and Mexico. Mexico, of course, not being a Commonwealth country, but the government there agreed to take some Poles, especially children, to look after them and to introduce them to new life. So the camps in Africa were liquidated in 1948, and then most of Polish, not all of them, but most of Polish people were transported to the UK. The ones that remained just wished to remain in Africa. Palestine was a great basis for Polish society in exile, because there were not only schools but also officials and the society just organized there. A lot of Polish Jews deserted, but with knowledge, probably with knowledge of the Polish generals, and just joined the fight for independent Israel. It was done with the, as I mentioned, the most likely agreement of the Polish generals. And you can see that those few countries, New Zealand, India, South Africa, and Mexico, accepted Polish orphans. So they just grew to become members of those societies, but still remembering about their Polish origins. Even after the main portion of Polish populace left with the others, still a lot of people decided to live through Iran. And Polish consulate in Tehran had their hands full of just registering these displaced persons and issuing with them with documents. We will be also discussing those kind of documents later on. So temporary Polish passports. Polish clergy also was traveling with civilians or were present with the clerks at the government institutions. So they were registering the births, marriages, deaths. So this is another source of documents valuable to us. So as to the army itself, it was transported to fight in Italy, and they were under command of British 8th Army that was fighting in Italy. Most notably, Poles fought under Monte Cassino and were crucial to this operation, to taking the monastery and the hill. They also fought at Ancona and Bologna. you can see the trail of Polish forces here. Some of them married in Italy, so it would also be worth a while to check in Italian documents, but they were most likely included in the Polish documentation that we will discuss later on. But just as a curiosity, many chose to somehow connect with Italian culture as they were there for quite some time. So after the victory of the Allied forces in Second World War, Stalin began pushing for Poles and most significantly the Polish corps under British command to return to Poland. But they felt that this would be not a great idea because as those who chose to return discovered, they were under control and they were reported to as they were not trusted by the new puppet state and by communist forces. So a lot of them chose not to go to Poland, and British people, even if they were reluctant at first, tried to create some framework for Poles to be able to remain. So they decided to create Polish Resettlement Corps. So in Polish it's Polski Korpus Przysposobienia I Rozmieszczenia. So the formation was most importantly responsible for finding jobs to ex-servicemen, but they were also treated somehow like paramilitary units because back then there was a feeling that even as the Second World War ended, there would be still soon a new conflict with Soviets, and having thousands of Polish soldiers at their side could be a good idea to, for example, take over Poland in the later phases of war. So it was treated something like that, but also helped finding jobs and starting new lives in Commonwealth countries. In the meantime, as I mentioned already, the Poles that were forced to join Wehrmacht, so German army, or were captured or deserted, they had a possibility to join Polish forces, and then as well became part of Polish Resettlement Corps. As a curiosity, they often chose to change their surnames, because if they were captured again by Germans, they would face a death penalty for desertion, and they would not be treated as prisoners of war. So this is something also to check in the documents. If the surname of your ancestor doesn't come up to the one you know, that could be the reason. They often dropped the second surname, I would say, after the war ended. Sometimes they stick with it. It's not a general rule. So 105,000 decided to come back to Poland. Poles have military files of those who decided to return, but as I mentioned, majority decided to stay in the UK, and then from the UK they left to Canada, to Australia, to South Africa, also the non-Commonwealth countries, so also Brazil, Mexico, Argentina, and started life anew, because they knew that with the new communist regime and also with the borders being changed, so Poland losing significant part of eastern territories, where they most often originated from, so Lwów, Nowogródek, Brześć, and so on, other towns and cities. They were from there because they were taken by the Soviets, so from eastern parts of the country that were no longer inside of new Polish Republic. So that's the one of the reasons that they chose not to return. Okay, moving on. And one important clue about the service: if your ancestors served in the Polish forces under British command and then Polish Resettlement Corps, it's important to make sure that they did not join the British Army after the war ended, so the direct British army, not the Polish units of the British Army. Most often it would be RAF and as Air Force, because a lot of Poles fought in the Air Force. And also it's important to check whether they had employment in public office, so being employed by the British government or other government of the Commonwealth country. Okay, so that is the timeline of the Polish Corps. Now, moving on to the documents itself. I hope that this part would be most interesting for you, because the nature of these documents is that the soldiers were given the documentation after their service in the Polish Resettlement Corps. So a lot of you can find those in the attic or at the relative's house. So we would like to show those documents to you. If you have those, they would be a great proof of Polish citizenship and allow you to apply. But please first check with us, send the documents and consult with us. So the kinds of documents, first of all, as I already mentioned, temporary passport issued in Iran, India, and Africa. So Polish officials were present there. They often issued some kind of identity documents, so this temporary passport. And the main bulk of the document would be the Polish military files. Fortunately, they remained with the British. So they are held by the division of British Ministry of Defense, which I will discuss in detail later on. Why I'm saying fortunately, because thanks to that, it is now intact and not destroyed by war or fires or taken away to Soviets or just gone. So other part would be vital records, birth, marriages, and deaths, also as mentioned, made by the clergymen that traveled with Poles, first in Iran and then Africa, India, and so on. They are held mostly by Polish Catholic Mission for England and Wales, but some portion is placed under custody of Sikorski Institute in London. And as long as those church documents were issued up to 1946, they would be accepted as government proof, because that's the year when Poles decided to switch from church-based registration of birth, marriages, and deaths to the government ones. And other kinds of documents, so concerning mostly civilians, cadets, students, can also be accepted as supporting evidence, and as mentioned already, they are also held by Sikorski Institute in London and the Piłsudski Polish Institute as well. And if you have a civilian that was somehow connected to the Polish soldier, then it's also worth a while to order the military document, because civilians could be mentioned in those as well. We will also discuss the other routes, so German routes, as you can remember, for the western parts of Poland, when the ancestors were taken to be forced laborers and then being displaced persons in the territory liberated by the Allies in Germany. For that, we have Bad Arolsen Archive. It was previously called International Tracing Service, based at Bad Arolsen. It's a town in Germany, and they still are a great support for family members trying to find about their ancestors or their relatives. So moving on to examples of the documents. First, we have Polish military files. The first one is called Zaświadczenie o zakończeniu służby, and in English it's just a discharge certificate. So certificate stating that so-and-so served in the Polish army under British command, and it states also the period of the service and that the service has ended. Up till recently, this sole document, only this one, was accepted as sufficient proof, so you would not need other military documents. Nowadays, the provincial office in Warsaw on top of this document would also require other documents, but not to worry, because those documents come in bulk. So when ordering the military files of your ancestors, you will receive not only this discharge certificate, but also other documents that the Polish government would like to see. So as the one of other documents is Zeszyt Ewidencyjny. It is just a military booklet of the soldier. Here is the main page. It would look like this, and inside it would look like this. The template is really one for all soldiers, so it should not look differently, but if it is, please consult us. We are also dealing with free analysis of the documents. And the final major document would be autentyczny odpis umowy w wojsku stałym, umowy służby w wojsku stałym, and it is just a legal agreement of the enlisting soldier to the Polish forces. It also has a lot of very important information about the ancestors, so it's worth having. So moving on to consular passports, here you can see the passport. It is not a booklet because, as you can imagine, the Polish official in Tehran organized their work ad hoc, so they not really had anything needed to issue documents just like they were before the war. But it's absolutely sufficient to prove that this is a passport and this is a Polish citizen. So it would look like this. And the second document example is a visa issued for one Anna Kociejewska from the Polish consulate in British East Africa. So as you can see, also in Africa, there were Polish clerks able to issue documents. Those kinds of documents, you would just need to have those, sadly, because not a lot of those remained in Sikorski or Piłsudski institutes. So this would be something to have in the attic or in the family archives. Okay, Polish Catholic records. Here you can see the example of marriage certificate issued by the Polish Catholic Mission in England and Wales. It's a modern template, but based on the source material that they have, having the all essential information about the event. Here you can see the contact details for the Polish Catholic Mission, and for German acts, as mentioned, for the other route for the ancestors. Fortunately, the Germans have the central database where you can order civil records. You cannot preview them, but you can order them from any German registry office. You would just need to know which one. So the town or city where the marriage or birth happened. First, you can also check the bad paroles and files, which we will move directly after this, to see where and when the marriage happened, or even perhaps the files would include the certificate itself, so you would not need to order it in the first place. So this is the document from Polish Catholic Mission. Yeah, so bad paroles and archives, it's a great source, not only for this kind of emigration, forced emigration, so also for all victims of Nazi regime, being held in the labor camps, being forced to labor at factories and farms, and just generally finding themselves displaced at the end of Second World War on the territory of Germany, controlled by Allied forces. Here you can see the link to the database, and you can just put the name and surname of your ancestor and search and see based on the date of birth, place of birth, or even parents' names, to confirm that this is your ancestor, because if you just put Jan Kowalski, there will be hundreds, if not thousands, of Jan Kowalskis to look for. So this is how it looks. You just put the name and surname and search. And this is one of the results. So here you can see the card from the camp of Mauthausen in Austria, present-day Austria. Okay, so finally, when discussing the military files, so the most important documents for those kind of, I would say, forced emigrations, for the route through USSR, Iran, Italy, up to Commonwealth countries for the ex-servicemen, the institution that you would like to check is called APC, Polish Enquiries. So this is a Polish division of the British Ministry of Defense. They are located at RAF base at Northolt. Two very pleasant ladies working there, both speak Polish and British, English, sorry. And you can see contact details here. So either write them to their headquarters or call them. I think putting an email would be the fastest one, but you can also call. If your ancestor and the ex-serviceman was fighting in the Air Force, you can first check Listaxes. This is a great database for, I believe, all veterans of the Polish Air Force under British command, and it stretches, as you can see, even to 1947. So well after the Second World War. And for the other branches of the army, and mostly for Monte Cassino veterans, you can see the other website. It's a website of Polish exiles of World War II, and they have archival lists. Sadly, you would have to go through them manually. They do not have search engines, so you would have to check every list that you would deem possible that your ancestor would be in. They are either from the military units or from cadet schools, and so on and so on. So you can see the example of searches done by Listaxes. This time for Stanisław Dąbrowski, you can see free Stanisław Dąbrowski and compare which one could be your ancestor. And as to the requirements to request the documents, I would like to point it out, the very valuable documents of Polish forces under British command. The most important requirement is being legal next of kin. What it means, so if it's your grandfather, for you to be able to request the documents, both your grandparents and your father or mother, depending on whether this is paternal or maternal grandfather, would have to be deceased. So this is really the closest living person. It does not mean if your aunt or uncle lives only they could have the documents requested. We are talking about direct line. So if your mother is still living, then your mother has to request the files and not you. If the widow of ex-serviceman is still living, then the widow has to request it, and so on. So you have it described here. For proving the lineage and for proving the next of kin, you would have to provide death and birth certificates. So birth certificates stating the parents' names on each one. So for example, if you are next of kin, you would need your birth certificate stating your parents, then your mother's or father's birth certificate stating the descent from the serviceman, and the death certificates for grandparents and for mother or father. Also, if you are represented, of course, the power of attorney, photo ID of any sorts, bill confirming your address, so it would be water or gas or electricity bill, really anything that confirms your permanent stay, and proof of payment of £30 if you are not requesting on behalf of a serviceman or his widow. So if it's a descendant of the soldier, then you would have to pay this fee. Not to worry, because the MOD and this division APC, it's called APC MOD, so Army Personnel Center of the British Ministry of Defense. They are very forgiving in terms of requirements. So if you do not have death certificate, you can show the photo of a tombstone. And if you do not have photo ID for your grandmother, you can show a bus pass or anything that would prove her identity. It could be even expired. So it's in stark contrast of the requirements for the Polish government, which are not that loose. And finally, the payment method. Please take a screenshot if you would like to do it on your own, and you would have to pay this the before mentioned fee of £30. This is the account number that you should pay to. Okay, so finally, our contact details. As mentioned, Your Roots in Poland is well-established genealogy and citizenship firm. We are offering free eligibility checks and case analysis, so we strongly advise to just contact us because you do not lose anything, and you can check whether you are eligible for the procedure, whether the documents you have are strong proof or you would need something else. We would love to share our experience with you. And if you would like to then follow up with this, we are also capable of conducting the whole procedure for you. We have a lot of experience in dealing with those dual citizenship of Polish British, Polish Canadian, Polish Australian, Polish New Zealander, and Polish South African cases. So the links, first one is our website. You can check it out to see our genealogy and citizenship offers. The second one, the survey, which you would also be given at the end of the presentation as a link to visit. It's very short and fun and interactive way to submit a request to us, give us general knowledge about your case, and be able to assist you even faster. And also you can just contact us directly by this email. Here is the survey. It's under 10 questions, so it's a very quick one. And you might ask, why would you need your Polish citizenship? Polish citizenship equals European citizenship. So it provides you possibility to reside, work, and learn in the European Union, travel freely, and spend less time in queues at airports, because European citizens have separate line. So I believe that's it, providing the historical background and our credentials, our contact details, and now we would be able to, more than happy to answer your questions. Okay, I will just take a sip of my tea. Okay, my grandparents came to the USA in 1906. My grandfather became a US citizen, but my cousin who lived next door to my grandfather said he did not become a US citizen. You don't have documentation. Okay, so I would recommend first checking on the US side, which would be most helpful for you. You could start with the United States Citizenship and Immigration, so USCIS. They accept queries from everybody, and it costs, I believe, $60. And you would receive a petition of naturalization or even naturalization certificate itself, and it would either prove that your ancestor was US citizen or was not. He could perhaps apply for citizenship but do not end the process, but the form would have a lot of interesting details. You can also check immigration sources such as Ellis Island. But sadly, I have to already state that if he came in 1906, it was before first citizenship law in Poland, which was in 1920. So most likely he didn't have Polish citizenship. He would have either Russian or Austrian or German citizenship, because Poland was partitioned up to this point as well in 1906. But please feel free to contact us. We can offer you our guidance in genealogy as well. Are there records of those who served in the Polish army in 1939 and taken prisoner of war? Okay, so yeah, that's a very good question. Thank you. First of all, the military documents of 1939 did not survive because of the nature of the war. It was a lot of damage. So we only have very few documents from the 1939, but there are records for prisoners of war. There is a museum in Poland called Centralne Muzeum Jeńców Wojennych w Opolu, located in Opole, and they have a documentation for a lot of prisoners of war. And also, as your ancestor was a prisoner of war, you can also check the Bad Arolsen archive I mentioned in my presentation, because most likely he was taken to the POW camp in Germany, and when he was liberated, he was treated as a displaced person in Germany. So he would have his file in the Bad Arolsen. My grandfather came to the USA in 1908. He joined Haller Army, okay, and served in France. Yes, definitely. His military service helps you. I mentioned that emigration before 1920 would disqualify in most of cases, but Haller Army not only helped in the formation of Polish state, so in 1918, but most often soldiers of this formation also fought the Bolshevik War, and it was in 1920. So it could confirm your ancestor was not only living in Poland back then, but also fighting for its cause, and it would be a sufficient proof of having Polish citizenship. So it would not be treated as your grandfather emigrating in 1908, but rather after his service ended in Haller Army, as I presume he went back to the US, but also he lived in Poland in those crucial years for us. How do I find out about my ancestry in Siemiatycze, Poland? My grandfather left in early 90s due to Cossack attacks. Okay, so I think that would be a great case for our genealogy department. We have a lot of excellent specialists in that field. We would check the state archives for Siemiatycze, so the state archive that is linked to this settlement, and just go through it. So finding birth, marriage, death records, and going backwards. That is the best way to finding out roots. So I would just encourage you to contact us, and we would make you the analysis and the offer. Okay. I would actually be in the same boat. My great-grandparents were born in annexed Polish territories at the end of 19th century. I've assumed that it may be more difficult to obtain citizenship. Yes. So sadly, I have to confirm this. Poland only regained independence in 1918 after the First World War ended. And only 2 years later, in 1920, the citizenship was even introduced. And it granted citizenship to all inhabitants of Poland and to those Poles who reported to the consulates. So even if your great-grandparents were already in the US, they were given opportunity to report to the consulate, to the Polish consulate, let's say in New York or Chicago or other place, and report themselves as Polish. But we know for a fact that not many families chose to do that because they were already living their American lives and not really interested in having this confirmed. And also, sadly, the documentation is not really there. So this is also some kind of document that you would need to find on your own in your family's archives, as this is not present in the state archives in Poland, really. Okay, there was an issue with the document issued by the IDF for people who immigrated to Israel. Right, yeah, I absolutely can confirm that. So IDF stands for Israeli Defense Forces. Sadly, the quick answer is the issue still remains. So you would have to prove for the Polish citizenship that your ancestor did not serve any non-Polish army, and it is done by proving by providing the letter from armed forces of said country that states and confirms that the ancestor did not serve. And for the IDF, the layout of the document has changed, I believe last year or even 2 years ago. And the new layout sadly is not accepted by Polish authorities, which unfortunately blocks a path for a lot of Polish Israeli, Polish Jewish families that would need to have it proved. And it is a matter of a court case, but still not resolved. Yeah. My grandmother left Poland in December of 1920 at the age of 15. Right. So the most important question here would be whether she left alone or with her parents or other legal guardians, because as long as she was a minor, her citizenship depended on her parents, her father really, given the law at the time. Most important for us is whether her father, so your great grandfather, had Polish citizenship at the time. If they traveled together, we would need documents for him. And given they left in December, they were already Polish citizens, but the question remains whether there are any documents issued between January, when the law was introduced, and December, when they left, for us to prove that they were citizens. For example, the population census. So first we would need to prove citizenship for him, and then just proving the lineage through your grandmother to you. My father was born in February in Warsaw. Would his children and grandchildren qualify for Polish citizenship? He was in German concentration camp. No birth certificate, but I have German records and identity card after the war. So if he was and I see that he was the last Polish ancestor, so I started saying main Polish ancestor, the last person from your family that lived in Poland, then quite honestly, the birth certificate would not be even needed, because the birth certificate is not a proof of citizenship. We would need other Polish documents, so Polish issued, not German ones, Polish issued document proving his citizenship, and then we would just need his marriage certificate and your birth certificate to prove the unbroken lineage from him to you. The German documents could be a great way to get more information where to look in Poland or to act as supporting documentation in the case itself. But the German documents cannot be treated as main proof of Polish citizenship, because the main piece have to come from Polish archives or your own private collections. But the document has to be original or certified copy issued first by the Polish institution. Next question. My mother was born in Krosno in 1908, but left Poland in 1928. But I don't know if she was a Polish citizen. Well, if she lived in Poland after 1920, as I mentioned, all inhabitants of Polish land, and Krosno was in Poland back then, were granted with citizenship. So she was most definitely Polish citizen. The question remains whether she remained Polish citizen, because for women, unfortunately, proving lineage is a pain because the law at the time was rather misogynistic, and with marriage or with naturalization, women most often lost their Polish citizenship. It was not that strict with men, because men were subject to being drafted to the Polish army, but with women it was easier to lose Polish citizenship, unfortunately. So we would need to see the case when she did marry, and when if she naturalized when it was when it occurred. Oh, big question. My family departed from Chojnice, Krajeńskie area, in 76 and went to the US. Other family members remained and lived there to the 1940s. Okay, I understand that I'm not eligible for citizenship. However, I have been informed that I've been Sephardi Jews from Spain. Yeah, the Spanish citizenship law is very, by descent, is very interesting subject. I'm not that proficient with that, but I know that Sephardic Jews are able to confirm their Spanish citizenship just by proving your name, your surname comes from this tradition of Sephardic Jews and proving the lineage. If I remember correctly, I just it was interesting subject for me, so I explored it, but I did not read it in the written laws, so it would be more like a curiosity. So definitely check on that. But if I remember correctly, just proving those two facts would enable you to apply for Spanish citizenship. Okay, and also, what assistance can you provide on Polish ancestral records and support ancestral history in Poland? So again, we would love to assist you on this genealogical trip to discover your roots. Please write about your case to us. Most importantly, listing names and surnames, dates of births, and places you know of the family lived at. And we would be able to provide you with an offer for the searches in state archives. My father, born in 1905, left Poland in 1927. I have a copy, so he was 22. I have copies and certificates of birth and christening and original documents of enlistments. Wow, and discharge. Well, sir, it looks like you have a very strong case. So I would like to encourage you to send over pictures, scans or pictures of those documents to us. We can confirm then your eligibility and whether the documents are definitely sufficient. But it looks like, as mentioned, you have strong case and definitely worth pursuing. Sorry about the sip break. I do have great-great-grandmother who arrived in Canada from Poland in July 1920. Could this be utilized to prove descent of Polish citizens? Again, I would encourage to contact us because each case is different, but I would like to add, just mentioned previously, that with female lineages, the descent is harder than in male lineages, because if your grandmother or great-great-grandmother naturalized before 1951, then she could lose Polish citizenship. But the eligibility check also has the purpose of proving that. So if you would like to have certainty, we would love to help you and check that for you. Okay, my mother was born in Porudno, Poland in 1922, now Ukraine. She was a displaced person in Germany where she met a GI and was married and came to the US. Okay, so the important question here would be about the date of marriage and whether she naturalized later on, and if so, the date of naturalization in the US, to check whether her citizenship was preserved. Because again, she most likely, I would say 99%, had Polish citizenship. Would just need to check whether it was not lost by the laws at the time. So the law that was present from 1920 up to 1951. My grandmother's two sisters remain in Poland and have since passed away. If I can find any documentation from them, would I be able to pursue Polish descent? Okay, so the Polish citizenship by descent bases on inheritance of citizenship. So it would have to be your direct ancestors coming from parents to children. So just speaking generally, so in your lineage, from your grandmother to your father or mother, and from your father or mother to you. So we would need to prove it in direct line, but the documents those sisters could be very helpful for us. If not for proving citizenship itself, because let's say they were documents just about them and not about their sister, they could have a lot of traces and data that could be used for conducting the search in the archives and finding documents for your direct ancestry. So also please ask about those documents, and when available, please send them over to our email address. We would be able to analyze them. My grandparents traveled to the US in 1905. They traveled from Hungarian Empire. That's right. The state was called Austria-Hungary. I have grandmother's birth certificate. They traveled from a small town near Sanok, and that's also correct. Sanok area was in Austria-Hungary back then, before the Poland regained independence. So unfortunately, most likely you would not be eligible for Polish citizenship by descent, because your ancestors left before the Polish state was rebirthed in 1918, and the citizenship was granted in 1920. But we can assist you with genealogical searches, or perhaps finding some document that prove that they had connection with Poland later on, when the citizenship was already introduced. Do we have more questions? Would adoption of a child born to a Polish father in 1946 by non-Poles make that child ineligible? No. The short answer is no. Adoption was first recognized as a method of passing citizenship only very recently in 2012. And before that, the adoption never appeared in Polish citizenship law. So the Polish citizenship is inherited from the moment of birth, and it is a birthright passed through a bloodline. So adoption here would not disrupt this process. We would just need to trace the biological parents and prove with documents that the Polish lineage indeed happened. So also please describe your case in detail and send it over to us. We'll be more than happy to analyze it for you. Thank you, Mark. I believe it was the last question. If you would like to ask anything else, we still have time. And I would be more than happy to address your question. We have another one. My grandparents came to the US in 1906. My aunt said my grandfather became US citizen. Oh, I believe we have this one already. Oh, have no documentation. Yeah, so that one I have already answered. I lost audio after about 10 minutes, but can see that my question being asked and responses in the chat. My grandmother came to as a widow from Łomża in 1914 and married my grandfather in 1915. Okay, she died when my father was only 7. Okay. The marriage, death, and birth records sadly are not proof of Polish citizenship, because citizenship in Poland is passed from all those generations, that were granted citizenship in the first place in 1920 to their descendants. So it is not based on rule of land, which is present in the US. So being born in the country provides you with a citizenship, but rather through descent, inheritance from parents, and parents from their parents, and so on. So we would need documents proving that your ancestors lived in Poland after 1920, and they were thus granted citizenship by the citizenship law and were able to pass it. If they came during First World War, unfortunately, I would worry that it would not be possible, because if they did not come back to Poland after the war ended, they most likely didn't hold Polish citizenship in the first place. My father was born in Mława in 1920. He and both parents were naturalized as US citizens in the 40s. And my dad served in the US armies. Okay, so naturalization in that case would not be so damaging because we are talking about male ancestor. And as mentioned, the law being misogynistic as it was, allowed for Polish citizens to naturalize as well, as long, as they were able to be drafted to the Polish army. Then the naturalization wasn't really accepted by the Polish authorities. So this is just shortening of the rule, but it gives what it was about. We would have to check the service in the US Army because it would be more difficult one. But as long as the service in the US Army happened within a span of Second World War, then you should be good because the US and Polish armies had the same purpose of defeating the Axis powers. So if he served in the US Army during Second World War, the Poles would not have any problem with that. If he served after that, so perhaps in Korean War, then Polish interests if you remember from the presentation, Poland was puppeted by the Soviets and had communist regime, so they were really on the other side of the conflict, supporting North Korea, sadly. So the Korean War could be damaging. So again, please contact us and send details, and we would be able to provide you with a clear answer about this. My mother left Poland in 1928 and became naturalized British citizen in 1948. Yeah, I'm sorry to say that it would disqualify you from getting Polish citizenship because due to the law at the time, adopting non-Polish citizenship by women, which were not protected by the draft to the Polish army, resulted in the loss of Polish citizenship. So if you do not have a paternal lineage of Polish citizenship as well, so your father coming also from Poland, then sadly this route would be not available to you. Next question. I have my mother's birth confirmation from Polish court. Oh, that's interesting. 1946. She was born in 1940. Married in 1939 in a Jewish marriage only. Would that qualify me even if my father immigrated to Israel and we faced the IDF letter issue? Okay, so if they married in 1939, then due to the law at the time, her citizenship started to be connected to his citizenship. So we would need to prove citizenship of father or both parents, but not mother only. If, on the other hand, someone is born out of wedlock, then I hope that it makes sense because I'm just trying to provide a short answer. If someone is born out of wedlock, then you would just need your mother's citizenship. But it is a great question because how to treat this marriage, right? In eyes of Polish institutions, the marriage didn't happen because it was only religious or ceremonial one. And they do not have it registered. So we could state that I'm sorry, I do not mean to offend you, but just for the case purposes, that you were born out of wedlock and thus you only inherited your mother's citizenship and not your father's citizenship. If that was just a religious marriage not recognized by Poland, but we would need to check it in more detail to be able to tell with certainty. My grandparents and my father, aged 5, immigrated to Canada in 1930 from Ochota near Helm and were naturalized in Canada in 1937. Can I pursue citizenship by descent despite them being naturalized in Canada? Okay, so as mentioned, naturalization in male lineages is not that bad because we would need first to, okay, your father was aged 5, so his citizenship still depended on his father's. So we would first need to see whether your paternal grandfather was still eligible to be drafted into Polish army, even in theory. So he was still in a conscription age. And please do not treat this as, oh, he most likely wasn't, as he was too old, because Polish army had a conscription at the times even up to 60 years. So as long as he was 50 or something like that, he could still be treated as eligible to be drafted to the Polish army. And this fact would protect him from naturalization. And then we would have to check how long he was protected by his military age, and whether your father was already an adult when your grandfather at some point lost his Polish citizenship because he was no longer eligible to be drafted and he was already naturalized. But perhaps your father was already an adult and had his own drafting age. I hope that it makes sense because it's a very complicated matter. But as long as it happens, you would be most likely covered. So please write to us with all the dates. So the dates of birth, you provided the age here, but the exact dates of birth, the exact date of naturalization. So I would be able to see how old was the grandfather and calculate really how long they were protected by their conscription age. Okay, next question. My mother was born in Pultusk in 1915 and remained there until 1939. Then was deported to labor camp in Soviet Union. Yes, she would be considered Polish citizen because she inhabited Second Polish Republic and thus she was granted with Polish citizenship. The sad news is that records from Pultusk, I know for a fact, I'm sorry, did not survive the war. They are severely damaged and not many records remain there, but perhaps there would be other sources to look for. For example, she lived for a while somewhere else, or some central records are available, so it's not all lost. I would start with getting her documentation held by the Institute of National Remembrance, because they have a division that just holds documents for Poles that were deported to the USSR, and also Archiwum Aknowych, so Central Archive of Modern Records in Warsaw. They also have a portion of that. So those would be the central records I would recommend first checking. And please also write to us. We could act as your proxies in contact with those archives and see what is there. And about the naturalization after 1951 is good. So as she naturalized in 1955, it's okay. She didn't lose her Polish citizenship by naturalization. It's just water, even though it's a wine glass. Okay. Let's see. Do we have more? Or is our time up really? Yeah, as in chat, please write all the inquiries to our email address. As we are not really able to answer all the questions here in the live session, but we'll be more than happy to assist you anyway. Outside of this webinar, we would just give you a reply to email, or we can even schedule some short calls if you would like that. Yeah, I see the question and answer already ended, but as mentioned, please do not worry. We would still be able to answer all your questions coming through email. Okay. Friday webinar. Yeah, so our webinars are being recorded, as this one is, and are uploaded to our YouTube channel. So please check our YouTube channel, and most likely the recording, if not already on our page there, would appear soon. Thank you, Kathy. And thank you really all for all your questions, for your participation, for your interest in the subject. And what can I say? I would be more than happy to work with you on your family's histories, to analyze your cases, to see the documents. Nothing brings more joy than seeing old archival documents for those who are really interested in genealogy and history, such as myself. So please do not feel bad for sending a lot of those. If not tomorrow, then the day after, you would have your reply. Okay, so I think that's all. You have our contact details and you have our website. The survey link would be provided to you as well after the end of this webinar. And again, thank you very much for the participation, for questions, for interest, and wishing you a lovely evening. Thank you.